Hey everyone, this is a review by Paul Mattick of Rosdolsky's uh, The Making of Marx's Capital. I think this is before this book was translated into English, and so it has the German title, which is Zur Entstehungsgeschichte des Marxischen Kapital by Rosdolsky. This review is from 1969. So here we go. 13 years after its completion, and only after the author's death did this work find a German publisher. In 1948, Rosdolsky came across one of the rare copies of the 1939 edition of Marx's Grundrisse der Kritik der politischen Ökonomie, Roh und Verwerf, 1857 to 1858, and began the work here reviewed. Although reissued in Berlin in 1953, the Grundrisse has not as yet found the attention the Grundrisse deserves. Apart from the publication of some excerpts in the English language from French and Japanese translations, and a book devoted to it by Kojiro Takagi, Rosdolsky's is the first extensive commentary on the Grundrisse, their relationship to capital, and the reasons for, as well as the discussions around, Marx's changing attempts to write capital. The writings and letters of Marx reveal that there were two different plans underlying the construction of capital. The first dates back to the year 1857. It was replaced by another one in 1866. Originally, Marx contemplated a work of 6 volumes, each dealing with a separate aspect of capitalist society. This idea was given up in favor of a more abstract method, which yielded the 3 volumes of Capital and the theories of surplus value. The Grundrisse represent the first attempt to write capital, but Marx utilized only part of the work in 1859 in his critique of political economy, and this part reappears in revised form in the final version of Capital. After the publication in 1929 of Henrik Grossmann's Die Änderung des Aufbauplans des Marxischen Kapital und ihrer Ursachen, an animated discussion has attempted to detect the particular reason which induced Marx to change his plans. According to Grossmann, to deal with just one of the debaters, Marx's reason was purely methodological, whereas in the first plan the 6 parts of the contemplated work were to be dealt with from the point of view of their specific subject matter. The second plan was determined by the epistemological requirements to disregard the immediately given world of appearance in order to lay bare the essential and basic relations of the capitalist production and circulation process. Only after exposure of the general relations of capital production, and by way of a method of approximations, would it have been possible to understand the externalities of the world market, such as profit, rent, wages, competition, credit, foreign trade, and so forth. Rosdolsky rejects this and other explanations as either wrong or superficial. Grossmann, of course, wrote prior to the publication of Grundrisse and could not be aware, as Rosdolsky was after its publication, that what Marx actually wrote in 1857 to 58 does not really differ from the final version of Capital. Like the first 2 volumes of the latter, Grundrisse too offers an abstract analysis of the capitalist production and circulation process. It is only in the 3rd volume of Capital the abstract analysis finds its full meaning in the elucidation of the concrete capitalist world. According to Rosdolsky, Marx did not change his original plan for methodological reasons, for the unvarying method used in all his writings is the dialectical method derived from Hegelian philosophy. Marx merely arranged his final version differently from that projected in the first plan. This involves some condensation, which extended the first book out of the contemplated 6 into 3 volumes of Capital, through its incorporation of material which, at first, had been reserved for separate treatment. What could not be incorporated in the final version of Capital, Rosdolsky suggests, Marx, had he found the time to do so, would most likely have dealt with as a continuation of Capital. Grundrisse has a special importance for Rosdolsky because Grundrisse reveals more clearly than Capital Marx's use of the dialectical method. Of course, Marx himself pointed out that he approached capitalism from a dialectical point of view, but this was largely ignored in the increasingly economics-oriented interpretation of Marx's theories. With Lenin and Lukács, Rosdolsky shares the opinion that the dialectic cannot be regarded as a mere stylistic embroidery of capital, for a whole series of decisive categories used by Marx stem directly from Hegel's logic. Rosdolsky substantiates this position by tracing the Hegelian elements in their materialistic transformation in both Grundrisse and Capital. The special stress laid upon the Hegelian categories does not, however, yield results decisively different from those won by their relative neglect, as for instance in Grossman's interpretation of Capital. In either case, the analysis goes from the abstract to the concrete, considers the domination of the whole over its parts, and differentiates between appearance and reality. In Rosdolsky's version, Marx's abstract model of capital production is not only a presupposition for the right comprehension of the phenomenal world, but, in germinal form, already contains in itself the full concrete reality of the capitalist system in its rise, development, and decay. This is demonstrated by a confrontation of capital with Grundrisse in such a way that knowledge of Grundrisse turns into an aid not only for a better understanding of capital, but also the process which led up to capital. The greater part of the book is made up of extensive passages from the works of Marx and Engels, which support as much Rosdolsky's commentary on them as the latter elucidate the quoted text. To consider this part of the work would be equivalent to reviewing both Capital and Grundrisse. It is then rather with Rosdolsky's criticism of other Marx interpreters that we must concern ourselves, criticisms which are offered as relevant places within the general text, at relevant places within the general text, and in a number of those appendices, in a number of appendices, some of which are of more recent origin. Among those criticized either with regard to Marx's methodology, the theory of value, the accumulation process, the problem of realization of surplus value, and the meaning and implications of Marx's reproduction schemes are Lenin, Hilferding, Kautsky, Bauer, Luxemburg, Robinson, and Lange. For example, according to Rosdolsky, Rosa Luxemburg's criticism of Marx rests on a methodological error, i.e. on her inability to distinguish clearly between the abstract nature of Marx's analysis of capitalist production and reproduction process of capital in general, and the actual world of competition of individual capitals. As against Hilferding, Rosdolsky stresses the great importance of the use-value concept in Marx's system, which Hilferding, together with other Marxists, chose to ignore. Against Lenin, Kautsky, and Bauer, Rosdolsky maintains that for Marx, capitalism had objective limits, and that his theory of accumulation was also a theory of collapse. He demonstrates convincingly that Joan Robinson's Marx critique merely shows her own lack of understanding, as well as her bourgeois bias. Finally, Rosdolsky rejects Oscar Lange's universalization of economic concepts, which in Rosdolsky's view is due to Lange's disregard of Marxian dialectics. Rosdolsky's own interpretation of capital, corroborated by Rosdolsky's reading of Grundrisse, is not always as clear as are his criticisms of other expositions. Although Rosdolsky insists upon the validity of Marx's theory of the falling rate of profit, Rosdolsky sees the basic contradiction of the capitalist system in its limited consuming power relative to the expanding process of production. In Rosdolsky's view, it is this contradiction which, by hindering the realization of surplus value, leads to recurrent and progressively more devastating crises. Rosdolsky denies nonetheless that Marx adhered to a theory of pauperization that implies declining living standards for the working population. There is merely a widening of the contrast between wages and profits, accompanied by the misery of unemployment and that of the poor in underdeveloped nations. There is not always a convincing connection between Rosdolsky's interpretation of Marx's crisis theory and the accumulation process and its consequences as presented in Capital. Although there are underconsumption, overproduction, and the realization problem, these are only various forms in which the basic contradiction of value production manifests itself in the market sphere. And even though capitalism does not exist without the market, it is in the underlying social relations of production that its difficulties must be looked for. Rosdolsky knew this, of course, but he did not always succeed in clearly exposing the real relations which made the world of appearance comprehensible. Whatever the shortcomings of this work may be, they do not diminish the importance of Rosdolsky's interpretation of Capital and Grundrisse, nor the importance of his overall view of theoretical Marxism. The end. Thank you so much for listening.